There's no getting over that rainbow when my smallest of dreams won't come true. I can take all the madness the world has to give, but I won't last a day without you.
Alright, hello there, thrill seekers. And that was a little bit of my version of the Carpenters song, I Won't Last a Day Without You. And if you watch the version I put up online yesterday, that's actually a different version. I deleted the version that I put up yesterday and put up a new version today. The vocals are different, so this one's better. So anyway, my hair's doing weird stuff today. Anyway, well, you don't watch these videos for the hair, right? Or maybe some of you do. If you do, you're crazy. So, I talked a little bit about ordaining people as priests a couple days ago on this video channel. And seeing some of the comments I got made me think maybe I should talk about this whole thing of ordaining priests and, what do we call it, ordaining monks and Dharma transmission. That's the three things I want to talk about. So let me see if I can get into it. The best source of information on all this stuff is an article written by Muho, who was the abbot of Antaiji, which was the temple established, I was going to say established by Kodo Sawaki, but I think it was established more for Kodo Sawaki, who was Gudo Nishijima Roshi's teacher, my teacher's teacher. He wasn't the person who Dharma transmitted Nishijima Roshi, but that's a whole other story. But he was one of Nishijima Roshi's teachers, and Muho wrote this great article which I think explains the whole deal about receiving precepts, ordaining as a monk, and Dharma transmission really as thoroughly and as well as anybody could for a kind of an English-speaking lay person. And I'll link to it below. It's multi-part. I read it all years ago, and I just skimmed over it before I decided to do this video, so I may end up contradicting some things that are in that article because I've probably forgotten some of the details. What I want to tell you about is sort of how it works for me. So if I'm contradicting what Muho says, it's because there are different ways of doing things. And what Muho wrote about is how it's done in the Soto Shu of Japan and how it was done in the lineage that he practiced in. And I'm going to tell you how it's done, or sort of how it's done in the lineage I practiced in is what I was going to say. And it's really crazy because it's not like the Catholic Church. At least as far as I understand the Catholic Church. As far as I understand the Catholic Church has long ago established one way of doing things. You know, there's a certain way of ordaining monks, of ordaining priests, of ordaining deacons, and I don't know, cardinals, and I don't know what all else they have in the Catholic Church. Who knows what sort of levels of things, and it's all sort of set. And as far as the Soto Shu, which is the organization in Japan that kind of oversees all this stuff, they kind of modeled themselves on the Catholic Church, and so the Soto Shu has kind of established their own way of doing things. But the Soto Shu kind of did that rather late in the game. It's not like the Catholics who kind of started very early in the game and established themselves as the dominating force and made themselves like, the single dominating force to figure out all things Catholic really early in the game, hundreds of years ago. The Soto Shu, as far as I understand it, has only existed maybe 100 years or so. I really don't know how long they've existed, but basically since the Meiji Restoration is when they've become something of importance. They may have existed before the Meiji Restoration. And the Meiji Restoration, go watch The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise if you want to know what that was. Happened in 1868 when the Americans under Admiral Perry came and forced the Japanese to end their, I think it was 400 or so years of isolation. Japan had been completely isolated or almost completely isolated from the rest of the world. And the Americans forced them to end their isolation, and the Japanese embarked on this whole thing, I don't know what you call it, of program, I guess, of rapid modernization, rapid westernization. And one of the things that happened was the establishment of the Soto Shu, which oversaw the Soto Zen Buddhism and modeled itself on the Catholic Church and sort of tried to make a Catholic Church version of Soto Zen Buddhism. And they have a certain way of ordaining monks and ordaining priests and so on and so forth. Now, one of the areas where it gets real confusing is, well, there's no such thing as Dharma transmission in Catholicism, as far as I know. And there's no real distinction, at least historically speaking, between a monk and a priest in Zen Buddhism. These days, there kinda is, but mostly in terms of the West. I think the San Francisco Zen Center, in fact, I know the San Francisco Zen Center, makes a clear distinction between what is a monk and what is a priest. And it's probable, maybe you can read this in Muho's article, that the Soto Shu has by now made a similar distinction in Japan. But historically speaking, a monk and a priest is it's kind of the same sort of thing. There's no monk, a monk in Catholicism is one thing and a priest is another thing. So it gets very murky in Zen because monk priest, it's the same kind of thing. Also, householders and non-householders, this is where it gets weird. Okay, so let me tell you how Nishijima Roshi does things or did things when he was alive. Nishijima Roshi really, he disregarded everything that the Soto Shu of Japan, the sort of Catholic Church version thingy that I've been talking about. He rejected pretty much everything that they did. And he looked to Dogen's writings, particularly in Shobo Genzo, and decided to do things the way Dogen said to do them. And Dogen really only talked about two kinds of what we might call ordination. And even using the word ordination is kind of placing a Western paradigm. I don't know what the word paradigm means, by the way. Sorry. But it's sort of placing a Western thingy on top of something that doesn't really fit. So even calling it ordination isn't quite right. But he Dogen only recognized two types of, let's call them ordination. One was precepts, receiving the precepts, and the other was Dharma transmission. Receiving the precepts is where you take a public vow to abide by the 16 Buddhist precepts, and you can go back and look at my videos previously on what those are. It's all on this channel. And if you search back for my previous videos, I did a whole series of videos on one video on each precept and how the whole thing works. That ceremony is usually called Shukkei Tokudo. And now I meant to look up what Tokudo translates to. And if I look it up, I'll put an insert in the video. But Shukkei means home leaving. And that is generally regarded as a ceremony where you leave your home and family and become a monk and enter the order of Buddhist monks. This is what it was back in the Buddha's day. And that was 2,500 years ago, and things have changed. For Nishijima Roshi, Shukkei home leaving was a more conceptual thing than actually leaving your home and family. He didn't require people to actually up and leave their home and family and go live in a monastery for the rest of their lives. In fact, even the Soto Shu doesn't really require that. But Be that as it may, Nishijima Roshi definitely didn't require that. He considered anybody who took the Buddhist precepts, who did the ceremony of Shukkei Tokudo, or Jukai. He just called it Jukai. He didn't even use this word Shukkei Tokudo at all. He regarded taking the Jukai ceremony as becoming a monk. After I did the Jukai ceremony, I asked him privately, so am I a monk now? And he said, yes, you are a monk. So he regarded that as becoming a monk. A lot of people wouldn't regard that as becoming a monk. They would regard Jukai as a separate ceremony, and another ceremony, which I just talked about, I'm sorry I'm confusing the heck out of you, Shukkei Tokudo, as a monk becoming ceremony. But Jukai and Shukkei Tokudo are really, really similar ceremonies. So, and then to make it even more confusing, in some places they have a thing called Zaikei Tokudo, which is doing the same Tokudo ceremony of becoming a monk, but Zaikei means you don't leave your home and family. The other ceremony that Nishijima Roshi did was Shiho, or Dharma transmission. This is a different kind of ceremony. So for Jukai, anybody who wanted Jukai, as far as Nishijima Roshi was concerned, could have Jukai. So you could just walk up to him first day you ever met him and said, hey, Nishijima Roshi, can I have Jukai? Can I take the Buddhist precepts? And, there would be logistics involved in, what day do you want to do it and how are we going to work this all out, because it's a whole ceremony and there's equipment involved and people involved. But barring all of that, it was yes, you can have a Jukai ceremony, no problem. Shiho is something different. Shiho is Dharma transmission, and this dates back to a probably mythical event that probably didn't really happen, but it's written about in the old scriptures, in which the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, the OG Buddha, the original Buddha, went up and he was supposed to give a lecture, and as was the way things were done back in those days and still done to this day in India, when a spiritual teacher was teaching, they would put flowers all over the place, and on the ground and everywhere. And Gautama Buddha supposedly picked up one of these flowers and held it in his hand, and there was a guy standing at the front named Mahakashapa, who was one of his longtime students, and Mahakashapa and the Buddha exchanged a glance, and the Buddha winked, supposedly, and smiled, and the Mahakashapa smiled back, and that was a recognition, supposedly, that Mahakashapa and the Buddha had attained the same state of realization, and from that day forward, Mahakashapa and the Buddha shared the, what do they call it? Well, the special seat that they sat on to give lectures, and Mahakashapa and the Buddha taught together. And then when the Buddha died, Mahakashapa took over the order of the Buddhists and became his first successor. Then Mahakashapa passed it on to somebody else, and I think it was Ananda. And then Ananda passed it on to somebody else. I'm not sure if Mahakashapa passed it on to Ananda. Anyway, there's a whole, you can read the whole list if you want. And this was passed on one-to-one, with one person receiving the Dharma, until Bodhidharma, which is a few hundred years later, passed it on to, I believe, 4 people, skin, flesh, bones, and marrow. That's right, 4 people. And then from then on, it became a multiple thing. So now, whereas before Bodhidharma, there was always just one Dharma heir, one Dharma transmission in the world, now there are hundreds, maybe thousands of Dharma transmitted people in the world, and I'm one of them. I received Dharma transmission from Nishijima Roshi, and in that case, it's kind of the most basic thing. It is a permission to teach independently. So it means your teacher has enough confidence in you that he or she believes that you are capable of teaching without any guidance or oversight at all, and you can go off on your own and become a teacher of Buddhism. There's Ziggy. That's the most basic thing it is. But different teachers have different criteria by which they will give Dharma transmission. And Muho, in his article, talks about, at the time he wrote this article, it sounds like he had not given Dharma transmission to anybody. He may have done so since he wrote that article. I do not know. I have not given Dharma transmission to anybody. And he gives you a little bit of what he considers to be his criteria for giving Dharma transmission. In my case, I asked Nishijima Roshi, why did you give me Dharma transmission? And Nishijima Roshi said to me, because you understand me completely. And it was an interesting moment that he said that, because when he said that, it was when he said, you understand me completely, you and me were the same person. I know that sounds weird, but I understood what he meant, that you and me, the distinction had disappeared. And you understand me completely was why he gave me Dharma transmission. And so for me personally, that has to be the criteria. There can be no other criteria than that. And so far, I have not met anybody to whom I could say, you understand me completely, and have you and me mean the same thing. And if I ever meet that person, maybe then Dharma transmission can happen. I remember talking to Tim McCarthy, my first teacher, about that, about Dharma transmission. And he was saying that Dharma transmission is something that happens, and then you make a ceremony about it later. So the Dharma transmission ceremony is not when Dharma transmission happens. Dharma transmission happens, and the ceremony is an acknowledgement that it has happened. And in a way, it's a bit like marriage. Marriage is a ceremony to acknowledge a union that has already taken place between the two people who get married. It's a bit like that, and it's a bit sacred, I think. My friend Rob has an opinion that he thinks in Japan people give Dharma transmission much too easily, and in the United States and maybe elsewhere people give Dharma transmission, they're much too stingy with it. They don't give it easily enough. I don't know if that's true. There were people I know, this is the problem that happened, one of the problems that happened when I ordained people as priests. That was, as I said in my previous video, a mistake on my part, because I thought I'll just make this other category of priest. Now, Nishijima Roshi never had a category of priest. This is something, like I said, I guess the American versions of Soto Zen Buddhism have a category of priest. Maybe the official Soto, whatever they're calling it, in America has a priest category. I know that San Francisco Zen Center, as I said, does have a priest category. And I thought, well, I'll create a priest category within Angel City Zen Center and make some people priests so that they will feel like they are real teachers and not feel like they are just substitutes. The problem was it went to some people's heads, and as I said on the video, last video, it went to one person's head in a really bad way. But there were other people who also expected, I know at least one other person expected that my making him a priest meant that Dharma transmission was a given, and that he got kind of upset because he didn't get Dharma transmission. But to me, Dharma transmission was something that it had to happen in the way that I just described to you. It had to be a case where you understand me completely could happen, and that hadn't happened. And if it had happened with him before he walked out and never wanted to speak to me again because I didn't give him Dharma transmission, then maybe it would have happened, and maybe if he would have stuck around a little longer, maybe that would have happened. But he got mad because he didn't get what he wanted. So, these sort of things happen, and this is why I think doing the priest thing was a big mistake. and the whole the whole thing is all phony. That's the other thing you got to understand about it. I mean, all it really means when you come down to it is somebody is vouching for you. I mean, that's all any sort of ordination means. That's all any sort of degree means. If you get a degree from Kent State University, it means Kent State University vouches that you are pretty smart in physics. If you get a degree in physics from Kent State University, then Kent State University says this guy has smarts of physics. But what does it mean? It just means somebody vouches for you. It doesn't, convey any magic. The other problem for me is once people started getting the idea that I was ordaining priests, there were people coming up to me wanting to be ordained as priests. And there were people, there was at least one person who I could see very clearly was trying to scam me. He was pretty obvious about it. By trying to get me to ordain him as a priest by kind of promising me a lot of money, if I'd ordain him as a priest, and I wasn't going to go for that. And I thought all these people who are kind of coming up to me wanting these ordinations from me. I am sorry about my hair today. Look, it's even worse. It makes me suspicious. Anytime somebody asks me to get, I've had some nice people, very sincere people want to get ordained by me, but I always feel like, get ordained by somebody good, Don't get ordained by me. Get ordained by somebody who's got some business ordaining people. So I think the whole thing is dumb, and that's why I'm not in the business of doing it anymore, because I think the whole thing is stupid and meaningless and pointless. And I feel sorry for people who get ordained, really I do, because it's what do you got, what do you got, especially if you got it from me, because it's meaningless and worthless. Especially if you got a priest ordination from me, it is absolutely worthless. And so for the 6 of you who are out there with priest ordinations from me, just know that it's a worthless ordination, and I'm sorry I ever gave it to you. So if you want to send money to me to not ordain anybody else as priest, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living, and I appreciate your support, but as always, you don't got to support me if you don't want to support me. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy, are you too hot out here? Do you want to go back inside and edit the video? Alright, we'll go back inside and edit the video. It is a little bit hot out here. Alright, let's edit the video.
Day after day I must face the world of strangers, where I don't belong, and I'm not that strong. It's nice to know that there's someone I can turn to who'll always care. You're always there when there's no getting over that rainbow. When my smallest of dreams won't come true, I can take all the madness the world has to give, but I won't last a day without you. So many times when the city seems to be without a friendly face, a lonely place, it's nice to know that you'll be there if I need you, and you'll always smile. It's all worthwhile when there's no getting over that rainbow. When my smallest smallest of dreams won't come true. I can take all the madness the world has to give, but I won't last a day without you. Touch me and I end up singing. Troubles seem to up and disappear. You touch me with the love you're bringing. I can't really lose if you are near. If all my friends have forgotten all their promises, they're not unkind, just hard to find. One look at you and I know that I could learn to live without the rest. I found the best. When there's no getting over that rainbow, when my smallest of dreams won't come true, I can take all the madness the world has to give, but I won't last a day without you. When there's no getting over that rainbow, when my smallest of dreams won't come true, I can take all the madness the world has to give, but I won't last a day without you.